I've assembled this control rod and the plate into the camera body, and I think I've done it a total of 4 times in an attempt to find a convenient way for this process to happen, and every time it's just been a failure. I've always got them together. I've never been exactly sure how I managed to get it together on that attempt, when previously it just wouldn't seem to go. But now I've got it figured out. So this is a different camera body, and it's a stand-in. So there'll be a continuity jump as this piece of video gets spliced in, and suddenly it picks up with the other camera, the subject camera. I've got about an hour of video there, and really it needs to be cut down to about 10 minutes because of all the wasted efforts in showing you how to do things. So let me strip this back out and show you how you get it together. Okay, so let's get this spring in place. This is the spring on the rear post. Just slide that over its post. Here is the arm that we need. I'll put that in place, slide that down there, over the post, compress the spring lightly. It's sitting in there neatly. It tucks in between the capping plate catch and the wall quite smoothly. And this is the bit we should have been doing. Taking a cotton bud or a Q-tip, I'll compress that spring slightly, pulling the lever down, and put the Q-tip in at the top. We'll just get that capping plate latch down out of the way so it's not causing us annoyance. And so what we have now is we have that lever slightly under tension. It's depressed down. You can see probably 5 millimeters, 3/16 of an inch of shaft above that lever. Now we can take this piece and slide it over the top of the lever and slide that upwards into position. So I've got the plates just sitting here loosely in place. I'll hold it with my finger and I can check that the arm moves. It seems to. I'll flip it over and see if I've got my screw holes lined up. It feels like I do. So I'll take one screw, drop that down there. Seeing any of this? Not much. Get that screw started. Let's try its mate. That's starting. Come back in here, check the movement of the arm. It moves freely. Take that cotton bud out now, I think. Supporting this from underneath again. Run these 2 screws up. Check the movement of the arm. It's working nicely. So if we release the capping plate and I can pull it back down with the arm, it latches into position. So we have this arm in with a minimal amount of fighting. So we can say that the secret of success is effectively having this arm compressed down slightly so that it's in the working range in this bracket, so it doesn't catch on things. And obviously the simplest way to do that was just to throw a cotton bud in there, a Q-tip, to keep this slightly compressed. It allowed me to get this bracket in, get it lined up, get the screws tightened up without it being a terrible fight. This is a technique that I should have hit on a long time ago, but that's how life goes. And now we can deal with the second and third pieces. So, this is where it gets entertaining. Well, more entertaining than that. So I'll slacken these screws off slightly. I need some space here. What I want to do is loosen this bracket so I can slide the next piece down into that gap. So I just loosen them up a little bit, because of course we don't want to displace the one we've already got in there. Right, get our second spring in position. This goes on the middle post. And this is the piece, this is the mirror setting lever. This is the piece we want on here next. So I'm doing the same thing, molybdenum paste on the inside of the hole, some on the back, some on the front, just very light coat. And then I want to get this in position in this gap here, because I've slackened off the screws. And get that over the middle post. I'll slacken those screws off a little bit more. Too much and things will fall out. We'll be back where we started. Okay, I think that just about went into place. It did. Okay. So the middle one's in place and the rear one's in place. I'll just tighten those screws up very slightly. Those two are working nicely, moving smoothly. So I've only got to get the front one in place now. So I'll put its spring in place on the post. That was the stronger of the three springs. I have the lever here, and I'll do exactly the same thing. A wipe of molybdenum paste front and rear and through the hole at the bottom where it runs over the post. Hopefully I've got enough play on those. I've got to slacken those screws off slightly so I've got just enough room to slide this in. And you can see why it's handy to have the back off the camera while you're doing this, because it would be flapping about and getting in your way. Don't want to slacken him off too much or we'll be in trouble. Right, so get that into that gap that I've created by loosening the screws off. And that's in position on the post. I'll hold that down lightly with my fingers and run those screws up. Check that things still move. All three should be moving. And those screws up a bit tighter. Check that nothing has been disturbed, that everything still moves. This one's floating off its pin at the bottom because it's got nothing preventing it at the top. But that's all moving smoothly. Snug those two screws up now. We're done with that part. Right, so now we've got to get the rest of this together. Have I got this in right? No, I haven't. I've just messed something up. Back where we were. The front one, let's get this out. This lever, this arm needs to be forward. We need to be underneath that. like that. That's better. This arm needs to be out. Okay. That's all good. Tighten your 2 screws up. Probably handy enough to put the back on the camera again at this stage so that we're no danger of pressing on that pressure plate with your fingers and making a mess of things. I'll just run the 3 screws in there. So we've got the 3 levers that control the movement of the capping plate and the mirror in place, and they're moving freely. Bring that down out the way and latch it in place. Oh, it's not going to latch because I haven't got the piece in that latches it. These pieces, they're now in line. Previously one was cocked over to one side because they were out of line. Now they're all in line. They'll work nicely on the cam. I dropped a cam in there that'll get that rest position. Something about there. Yeah. It'll keep things in place. If I put one of the front cams on there, it would probably keep the other piece in place. It does. Okay, none of that stuff's flopping around now. Right. This piece, the piece that latches the mirror down, that needs to go next. Okay, well I've got this pretty much complete minus its spring here at the moment. This is reassembly number 2 or 3. I'm going to strip all those components out again and see if I can demonstrate the most practical way to get these pieces in with the least amount of fighting. I've got the back missing from the camera, makes it much easier to deal with. The spring here, I've got that off the camera. The baffle here, I've got that off the camera. So there's nothing else I need to do here much. This bracket, this little thing here, this catch, I'm going to take that off the camera. Single lock screw at this position. That should push out and flip up this latch if it's holding anything so that this is floating fairly free. We should be able to pull this piece out and wriggle it off its stand. There, it's come off, come up. That washer, I'll put that carefully to one side. And that's going to be one of the last things to go back in. So, now we just need to take those components out. Now you'll have taken note of where the springs went. These screws, of course, are easy to get to, and they've just popped off nicely for me. And look at that, all the componentry has fallen out, and the springs too by the looks. Well, that's the front spring. The front spring is a stronger spring than the other two. The other two appear to be the same tension. Okay, so starting with the bare bones body, what do we have to achieve? Well, this is the component that holds down the capping plate. This is the first component to go in. Obviously that goes on the rearmost post down here. See if I can get that hooked into place. Okay, so now that's sitting loosely in place. It's over the post. The spring is underneath it. You can see it's sprung loaded. And we need to get its holding bracket in place. Now this bracket is a narrow groove here, a wide groove here. The wide groove goes to the front. The narrow groove, we have to get that over this bracket and then get the screws in place. And this is the most difficult part. There's a boss. See if I can show it to you. I'll get this back out. This boss on the side of the capping plate, it pretty much fouls this plate. There's a little bit of a recess cut into that plate where it runs up against that boss. Now getting everything seated is tricky because there's not much clearance. Let me get this rod back in place. And I'll drop this little bracket into there, and I've got to get that bracket, this edge of the bracket, hooked around behind the lever that we've put into place. It's tricky because that it's certainly not playing nicely. I think that fell into place there now. That looks like that's correct. Now I've got to get its two screw holes lined up. I'm putting my finger on the inside, and the holes on the outside here, I'm just going to run a pair of tweezers through there, see if I can pick up those screw holes all the way through the plate. I can feel it on both fingers. So don't press hard, you won't enjoy the result. See if I can get a screw started. This is where it tends to all go wrong. That screw's not starting, so the hole's not lined up correctly. I'll try its mate. No, I haven't got the holes lined up correctly. I don't know why. No, most definitely not. It's too low, that bracket. The bracket's not back far enough, and it's to do with that boss on the shaft of the capping plate, I think. It's just not dropping back into place. Yeah, if I look in from the side, I can see that. I can see that that boss was holding me up. Let me try again. I'm looking down through here trying to see where those screw holes are. I can feel it now. Let's try again. No, the screw's not starting. I can't have those holes lined up. I can tell from the angle of the bracket here that it's not back far enough in the camera. It's one of those jobs that you really need half a dozen fingers extra for. Except if you did have extra fingers, you'd have nowhere to fit them in the space. Everything appears to be seated there. Now it's suddenly not. Now that bracket's moved again. One of the problems you have is that these components I've just conveniently lubricated with a bit of molybdenum paste so that they're slippery, and as a result they slide around while you're trying to get things in position. Now I don't know that there's an answer to that problem. I'm getting the bracket tucked in behind that boss on the capping plate. Well, that sounded very positive. That was a handy sounding click. And the arm does move. Again, I'll try holding that firmly from the inside with my finger and getting one of these screws in position. It's not lined up. I'm just taking this, I'll get this up on a block of wood actually. so I can work at it from underneath. I can get my screwdriver onto the screw head underneath here, hopefully. That screw started running in. Okay, I've got one screw in. The lever's moving. I'll get the other screw in now. Hopefully this... I had trouble yesterday when I was doing this, getting the second screw to start. It was like the bracket was on an angle. No, it's going in now. So I've got both screws in, and the lever moves freely, and its return spring's doing its job. Okay, so what have I learnt from that? Well, I don't think I've learned anything particularly useful. What can I say? That when getting this plate up into the camera, this little recess here must clear or get tucked behind the boss here on the capping plate. And it's difficult to achieve. You have to have this thing firmly clipped. Where's the old part? That was the old part. That goes that way up. This has to be firmly running in its groove. And its operating range is limited between here and here. So if it's up too far, it won't want to drop into place properly. Right here is where it should work. This is the original part we took out of the camera, and there's a shiny spot right there. Well, that's where the high pressure is, and that's where it's actually bent. So I don't have an easy answer. I wanted a simple technique which would get that into place without any fights. Unfortunately, I don't have one. But I thought it was worth having another attempt at that to see if I could come up with a good method that people could follow and it would give them a good result. Now I'm going to get the central lever in place, the one that does the mirror, so I'm just going to back this screw off, one turn in each case. That's to loosen the bracket up so I can slide down the next lever. And here I've got to be careful because I'm stupidly have old and new parts all on the bench at the same time. That's the straight ones, that must be the right part. So I can slide that in there and get it over its post and spring. And I'll just run those screws up half a turn or so. And check that moves. It's jamming. Why is it jamming? Is it not seated correctly? Now it just dropped into place. Our next challenge is to get this piece back in. Just making sure here that I'm getting things in the correct position. This is the catch that holds the mirror down in the cocked position. And we've got to get this into its seat down here, and the slot on here lined up with the pin here. So we need the washer on that pin. And this we need to get in its hole in the base and with a slot over that pin pretty much all at the same time. Now with only a minor bit of wriggling that can be achieved. I'm sorry I'm not keeping this in shot. It just will not stay in shot. There's too much wriggling going on here. So you can see how I've got that. This is another pair of tweezers. Okay, I've got that started in the slot. Check that that lever moves. It does. And I'll push that post down in its slot. Now holding my finger on that from underneath so it doesn't fall out. I'll run its little lock screw in here, just lightly. Okay, so I'm just checking that things work. Release the capping plate. I'll pull down the capping plate with its lever. Oh, it can't get past here because that's not in the set position. Let me just get that right. Okay, now it should. Capping plate goes down and should catch. The second one should bring down our mirror, and that releases the catch and allows us to catch the mirror. So that's working. And if we push this back out of the way and release this, the mirror should pop up. If we touch this tab here, the capping plate should pop up. So those are back in place. I just need to get the spring on here, back where that came from, and then we put the baffle back in the bottom here. We're still in shot after a fashion. Okay. Getting this spring back in place. It goes over that lower boss there with a groove around it. The end of the spring tucks down got a problem here with magnetised screwdrivers that I'm using to poke things about with. It makes life a bit entertaining. Let's try a toothpick. Excuse me. Okay. So this spring has to go over that boss, around that groove in that boss there, up. It's just pinged off. I found it. This is a very awkward spring to get in place. It's very light. It's exceedingly springy, and it would much rather be on the other side of the room than on the camera. Okay, I've got it over its boss. This end of the spring I've got to pick up and hook under that little lever there without dislodging anything. It's not doing it for me. That's it. So now this lever's sprung loaded, and just release this. And this lever here, this lever here is sprung loaded. Now they control that catch action. So if I pull down the mirror one, it comes down, the arm on the mirror, just release that again. The arm on the mirror, which is the post coming out the side of the mirror. Where are we? Here. This post here comes down, strikes the top of this lever and flips that out of the way, which allows the mirror to rise. Okay, see if I can get this down again. So pop that out the way, press that down. Okay, so that action is armed. It should hold the mirror. As soon as the mirror comes down and that arm hits this, it lifts this out of the way, allows this to drop, allows this arm at the back to come in and play it, and that's holding things firmly. It can't release by itself. When we put the shutter release on there and press the shutter release, it pushes this little arm back out of the way, which allows this to be brought down, removing this catch from the mirror and allowing the mirror to rise. We can put the baffle back in place in the base of the camera. Now this is an awkward thing to get in place. There's no easy way to do it. The way I've found that you deal with this is that you put the two screws loosely in place in the baffle like that, and then not dropping the baffle on the mat. Taking the baffle in your tweezers like this, lower it into position, and run those screws in. Now it's dark down here, I can't see what's happening hardly at all, and I'm sure you can't because you're not at the right angle. But I can just about line those up with, I've got one lined up, and I can tell I've got it lined up because the screw started and the bracket started, the baffle started to rise. And I can get the other screw started, check that that baffle is as square as I can get it, get my two screws tightened up, okay, and that's all in place, and you can tell by the sound that that's firmly in place. So all of that stuff that was broken is now good to go and it's working again. I'm just going to assemble the film advance. You've seen me do the film advance before. I'll get the body all back together. I already have the shutter serviced and ready to go back in the camera. We're going to have to replace the cocking rack because it was it missing or broke? It was missing. We've got to replace the main cam transfer shaft because it's got a broken tooth, and I've already checked, and where the tooth is broken is where we need a tooth. So it wasn't like that was on upside down and it had been stressed out and broken a tooth. the tooth was where a tooth needed to be. So we'll replace the pair of those as I put this back together. And if it all assembles without any fights, and I reasonably expect that it will, you won't see this again until I have got the front back on the camera and I can demonstrate a working shutter complete with mirror and capping plate. So just give me an hour and a half to deal with this. Camera number 6. This one. All go again now. The parts count: 3 levers, the one that sets the capping plate, the one that sets the mirror, and the one that releases the mirror. The transfer shaft cam was missing a tooth, and the camera was missing its cocking rack. We don't know what state that had been in. So here's the camera. All go now, but we've one last task to be done. When I had all that stuff apart, I had out the catch, this catch that holds the mirror down. That's adjustable, and that's adjustable so that you can ensure that the image in the finder will match the image at the film plane. Now the image at the film plane is not a problem because I have the distance here set correctly. I have a correctly adjusted lens to go on the camera, so all I need to do is make sure that when I look out the window at an infinity target, the little split image in the finder, the images align correctly. So the procedure for this, I'll tell you all about it. That bracket that holds the meter can be adjusted. The adjustment happens at this point. The lock screw for the adjustment is a little grub screw right here. The adjustment itself is made by moving that bracket in and out. Now, I can run a fine screw into there, so I've got something to grab it with. This is going directly into the shaft. If I loosen this screw, it enables me to move that inwards or outwards until my images align correctly on the screen. I'll have a quick look out the mirror and see what the image currently looks like and report back. I've got an infinity target, and I can tell you that the images don't align at infinity. As you move the focus ring towards the infinity position, the images don't quite line up. So I'll slacken that lock screw off, and I'll move that mirror in very slightly and tighten the screw. Cycle the shutter, so I want to make sure that the mirror clips into place normally, and I'll check again. That's nearly right. It's just not quite there. So I'll slacken that lock screw again. Move that mirror in very slightly, that catch rather. Cycle the shutter again and check. And that's it. That's correct. So that little job is done. This camera would be fit to go. Of course it lacks a meter and it's naked at the moment because the leatherettes are off it. There's a little cosmetic problem here. It needs a new accessory shoe. This camera had been dropped on its head at some stage, so this is slightly pushed in on the prism housing. If I took all this off, I'd be able to push that prism housing back on. You put a new shoe on the top, you'd never know there was a problem. So camera number 6 has been dealt to. The component count, moderately high. The difficulty in dealing with the problem, moderately high. But it's a good working Reflex 3 again. And hopefully you don't strike a problem like that. But if you do, now you know what's involved. Thanks for watching.